Okay, so General Hodges, thank you again for accepting our invitation for this interview. I would like to start by asking you which are, from your perspective, the three most important security-related events that took place in 2023 and have changed or influenced the security environment.
Well, obviously, the most significant security event that's happening, that happened in 2023 began before that, but it's the continuation of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The incredible amounts of violence, the violation of every international agreement about human rights and protection of civilians that Russia has continued to do. And it's resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of not only soldiers, but also civilians, and the disruption of grain supplies, the disruption of energy. This really is, for me, the most significant thing, the largest war in Europe since 1945. The second thing I think is, of course, is related, and it's not a coincidence. It's the attack by Hamas on Israel in October this year. Hamas, of course, is enabled and empowered by Iran. Iran is Russia's closest and most important ally, just like Russia is Iran's closest and most important ally. And so I don't think it was a coincidence that Hamas attacked Israel when they did, because this shifted the attention of the world from Ukraine to Israel. That means not only attention and pressure on the Kremlin, but also resources that Ukraine needs are being diverted towards Israel. So this was a gift for the Kremlin, and I don't think it was an accident. I think they're connected. It's hard to say what is the third biggest challenge to security, but as I look at those two events that I just talked about, of course, the Chinese are watching to see, can the United States, with all of its allies in Europe, in the Indo-Pacific region, in the Middle East, do we have the collective political will, the industrial capacity, and the military capability to be able to help Ukraine defeat Russia, help Israel destroy Hamas, while still pushing Israel towards a two-state solution, to prevent Iran from escalating this conflict, and then finally to still be able to convey to the Chinese that we are ready for them also. That is our big challenge, is to have the ability, the will, capacity, and capability to address all of those challenges simultaneously.
When it comes strictly to the war in Ukraine, how would you describe 2023 from the war perspective? How did the Ukrainian armed forces fight this war? How did the Russian armed forces fight this war? What are the biggest achievements, let's say, from the Ukrainian perspective?
I think there's too much negative defeatist talking going on now about Ukraine. Of course, everyone, all of us would have preferred to see a rapid breakthrough by Ukrainian forces this summer of the Russian defenses, a total collapse of Russian defenses. That didn't happen. But I don't blame the Ukrainians for it. I blame us, the United States and our allies, for failing to give Ukraine what they needed to be successful. Of course, we all have provided a lot to Ukraine, but that's not what's important. It's making sure they have what they need to actually win. And we have continued to fail to say that our desired strategic outcome for this is for Ukraine to actually win this war against Russia. So we failed to deliver equipment on time. The Russians were not stupid. They took advantage of the time to build up their defenses, and we saw the result of that. And we also have still failed to deliver the long-range munitions, the precision weapons that would enable Ukraine to make Crimea impossible for Russia to use it as a base, to make it untenable, for example. and to enable Ukraine to destroy Russian headquarters and logistics, which is going to be the key. So we're not where we had hoped to be or where we wanted to be. I certainly overestimated what could happen because I was really sure that the U.S. and Germany and other governments would be more willing to provide Ukraine what was needed. I was wrong. Now, having said that, it's important to keep in mind that here, that after 9 years, I mean, this war started back in 2014, as you know. The large-scale invasion began in February 22, but the war started in 2014 with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and seizure of Crimea. After all that time, with all the advantages, Russia still only controls about 19% of Ukraine. That's incredible. A report just came out that they've had over 300,000 casualties, killed and seriously wounded. Thousands of tanks gone. They have not been able to interdict the Ukrainian logistics, the lines of communication from Poland that bring in new equipment and ammunition. Not one train or convoy has been destroyed. The Ukrainians have forced the Russian Black Sea Fleet to begin withdrawal from Sevastopol. And Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. So when I think about where we are in the war, I think the situation is actually a lot worse for Russia than it is for Ukraine. The key is us. Will we help Ukraine be successful? If we will, then that will take away Russia's only hope, which is that the West gives up.
How do you foresee 2024 from the perspective of the war in Ukraine? What do you think will happen next?
I think 2024 is going to be the key year, of course. What happens next for a variety of reasons. The willingness of the West to continue to recognize the importance of Ukraine winning. How does Russia deal with their own internal challenges? I mean, clearly their defense industry is in trouble. They're having to import low-quality ammunition from North Korea. No Russians want to be in the army because they know they will end up going to the meat grinder in Ukraine. So I think Russia has a lot of problems that the West should be exploiting. Over the next few months, I think Ukraine will be working hard to regain the initiative somehow. I'm not going to predict that there will be a new summer offensive or something like that, but I think they will want to keep the pressure on Russian logistics. They will want to keep pressure on Crimea. They will want to improve their air defense because obviously we're already seeing it. The Russians are going to be launching missiles at civilian targets all winter. So they're going to be working on improving their air defense and also the resilience of their power generation infrastructure. I think that they will probably do something that we call reconstitution, where they take a unit that's in the fight, pull them out of the fight for 1 or 2 months, replace losses, replace damaged equipment, rest, go through training, and rebuild the unit so that it can be put back into the fight. I think they'll probably be doing that with some of their brigades. I think that they will, we will see efforts that we need to see efforts by Ukraine to fix their manning system, their manpower issues. There are plenty of people, plenty of Ukrainian men and women that are military age, that are fit, that could be in the military, but their system for recruiting, finding them, getting them in is not very efficient. There are thousands of Ukrainian military age males walking around in Romania, Poland, Germany, that should be in Ukraine. There are thousands of them in Ukraine. And there also are tens of thousands of women that would be very good soldiers if Ukraine makes the necessary adjustments to incorporate them. So they've got to fix their manpower system. They've got plenty of people. I anticipate that they'll be working hard to improve their ability to operate against Russia's very, very powerful electronic warfare capability. The Russians have always been the best at this, and they continue to be the best. their ability to jam communications, jam GPS targeting systems. Ukraine's got to figure out a way to, but we have to help them find a way to counter that. And then finally, I think we will see increased efforts for Ukraine to grow its own defense industry again, to be producing ammunition, equipment, and so on. I know some Western companies are in Ukraine now, helping with that. But I think Ukraine is going to have to, they know they have to get more self-sufficient, especially if it looks like the West is unable to provide everything that's needed.
When it comes to the Israel-Hamas war, how much would you say this conflict affect the security dynamic in the Middle East? And how is that changing the global security environment in the future?
This is a real problem. Iran obviously did not want to see Israel and Arab countries in the region moving closer together and implementing the Abraham Accord. That's the worst thing for Iran. And so that's why I think they want their support for Hamas, as well as continued support for the Houthis, who are creating a real problem with missiles against ships and shipping, and in effect, or have Israel's southern port almost blockaded, which is incredible. And then you've got Hezbollah on the north of Israel that's threatening to come in, but they haven't done so yet. So Iran is achieving what they wanted, which was to bring to a halt any progress of Israeli cooperation with Arab countries in the region. That's the first part. The second part of this is that the Israeli government under Prime Minister Netanyahu has shown zero interest in anything that looks like a two-state solution or some sort of a peaceful coexistence with their Palestinian neighbors. I get it that they will not do anything with Hamas. They shouldn't. I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization. All of them should burn in hell forever. But all Palestinians are not Hamas. And so the Palestinians have just as much right to exist as do the Israelis. And I think that the Netanyahu government, which depends in its coalition on extremist political groups inside Israel, is unwilling thus far to do what they should do to, for example, stop the illegal settlements going into the West Bank. There's got to be a political dimension to this operation in Gaza. Right now, the mission is only destroy Hamas. And I can understand that. I mean, the attack that the Hamas launched on October the 7th was designed not like a traditional terrorist organization, which was, blow up a building, blow up a school, something like that. It was so heinous, the way they targeted women, old people, young people, the brutal beheading of soldiers, the violence in so many different ways. They knew that the Netanyahu government would react completely over the top. That's what they wanted. They wanted this massive, angry, emotional response, which is completely understandable. The problem is that Israel then moves into Gaza, and no matter how you try to describe it or minimize it, thousands of innocent people have been killed. And this makes it increasingly difficult for countries that are normally supportive of Israel. There's a lot of pressure. I mean, you see what my own government, my president, Secretary Blinken, trying to find ways to reduce the impact on innocent people. But for the Israeli Defense Force, their mission is to destroy Hamas. There's no guidance from the government, at least not publicly, that would indicate that we have to do this in such a way that we'll be able to live peacefully with Palestinians. And so I think the way that the Israelis are doing this, actually, while they will severely damage Hamas, they will destroy a lot of Hamas infrastructure. It's going to be very difficult to transition then towards some sort of end state that everybody can live with.
But do you think that next year will be the year that terrorism will be out of Gaza? Is that even possible?
I don't think it's possible, but certainly whatever the governance is for Gaza cannot include Hamas. That's clearly a non-starter. But it'll have to be Palestinian. I don't think the U.S. would support an Israeli governance over Gaza, for example. The problem is finding the right Palestinians that have the courage and the skill and the political power to be able to do that without being constantly undermined by all the different groups out there that don't want to see a peaceful settlement. I mean, as long as large numbers of Palestinians, believe that Israel should be eliminated, it's going to be difficult. So this is the dilemma.
Should we expect new alliances to be created in the area in the context of this war, or after this war will end?
I suspect that the United States and other allies will work closely with countries. I mean, Iran is still the bad guy here. The Iranians are the center of gravity, if you will, of the security environment in the Middle East. So the U.S., of course, has an interest in working with other countries to contain Iran's nuclear hopes, as well as Iran's support for the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas and other organizations. But you see Russia, of course. Putin was just visiting one of the Arab nations recently. So where we fail to lead, there's a vacuum. The Russians or the Chinese are going to step in there. So we're going to have to figure out how do we do that. And that's why I think it's important that the United States and our allies look at all of these challenges as part of a whole. It's defeating Russia, defeating Hamas, containing Iran, conveying to the Chinese that we have the ability to do all of this. So do not make a terrible mistake. I think that's the kind of a strategic framework that we have to have. I don't know that we can do these as different, isolated, separate challenges.
Now, getting back to Europe, what are the top, let's say, 3 security threats against Europe in 2024 from your perspective?
Well, of course, the first and most significant is Russia. I think Russia, the Kremlin leadership has made it clear that Ukraine is not the end, that they're not really interested in negotiating with Ukraine, that they want the destruction of Ukraine as a state and of the government. That has not changed. And they clearly are willing to expend tens of thousands of lives of their own soldiers to achieve that. So this is a significant challenge for Europe. Whether or not the U.S. is involved, the threat is going to be there. And so Europe is going to have to take serious these threats and do what's necessary to prepare themselves militarily, but also in every other aspect of security. Resilient societies, sticking together. I mean, what's happening in the EU, for example, what Orban is doing, what the Hungarians are doing is just absolutely terrible. And Slovakia also is a concern, but they are carrying out the wishes of the Kremlin. This will be a problem. The second big challenge, I guess, is related to that is maintaining unity inside Europe. I mean, the combined populations and economies and capabilities of all the European countries, it dwarfs any challenger. It dwarfs Russia. It dwarfs even China in terms of real industrial capability. But they've got to work together on these things. And obviously much easier for me to say than it is for them to do, but I think European security and prosperity does depend on some cohesion and unity on those things where you have shared objectives. The third sort of challenge, I think, is more internal. You do see the rise. I live here in Germany. The rise of right-wing extremism, which is a concern. Of course, we have it in the U.S. also, which is a real concern. And so for all of us, our security depends not just on having strong militaries and strong economies, it also depends on having strong societies where people respect the government, they trust the government, governments deliver to people what they're supposed to, and where you eliminate corruption, you have strong, active journalists that are shining the light on things exactly like what you do. These are important parts of resilient societies. And if we don't have that, then you get right-wing extremist organizations that are able to exploit people's fear about immigration, for example, or not trusting their government. I think this is a really significant challenge for all of our countries.
If you were to advise the European countries to strengthen their defense posture, what would you say to them? What shall they do?
I will say three things. Number one, you have to acknowledge that there is a real threat and explain it to your population. If you don't acknowledge that there is a threat, and if you cannot explain it to your population, then I think that people are like, why should we spend money on it? And that, which is a fair question. So the government has to articulate the threat. So that's number one. Number two, building up your capability to be able to defend. That means obviously modernization, industrial production, making the ammunition necessary. I mean, we have to get back in the business of security. We used to do it, but we have to get back in the business of security again. And then finally, the third thing I would say is, it's one of my favorite topics, is this military mobility. It's the ability to move around inside Europe. That's important for commercial reasons as well as military reasons. They have to be able to move as faster than Russian forces. And right now, I don't think that we can. So those would be my three priorities.